Chapter 1: The Awakening. Isabella sat by the window, staring at the city lights that flickered like distant stars. The weight in her chest had become unbearable, yet she remained frozen in place, trapped in the cycle she had convinced herself was love. Ethan had once been charming, attentive, and loving, at least in the beginning. But over time, his affection had turned into control, his kindness into manipulation, his love into suffocation. She had spent years making excuses for him. He didn't mean to be so harsh. He was just stressed. It was her fault for not understanding him better. But as she sat there, listening to the silence after yet another argument, she felt something shift inside her. A realization long overdue settled into her heart. This wasn't love. This was a cage, and she was done pretending it was home. The apartment around her was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the hardwood floor like long, grasping fingers. The hum of the city outside was a stark contrast to the stillness in her heart. Her hands, resting in her lap, trembled slightly as she traced the faint bruises on her wrist. Not from violence. Ethan had never hit her, but from the way he would grip her arm just a little too hard when she tried to pull away. The way his fingers would dig into her skin as he told her what she should be, who she should be, how she should love him. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, as memories flickered through her mind. The first time they met at a coffee shop, his easy smile, the way he had made her laugh until her sides ached. The nights they had spent curled up together, whispering secrets and dreaming about the future. But then the gradual shift. The way he had begun to criticize her clothing, her friends, her ambitions. The way he would twist her words, make her doubt herself, make her believe she was always the problem. A part of her had always known. The part that hesitated before answering his calls, that flinched when his voice turned sharp, that longed for the version of herself that existed before him. But love, or what she thought was love, had kept her bound. She had given him everything, believing that if she just loved him enough, he would change. That if she sacrificed enough of herself, he would finally see her worth. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to be suffocating. Wasn't supposed to leave her feeling small and unseen. She had mistaken possession for passion, control for care. And now, sitting in the dim glow of the city, she knew, if she stayed, she would lose herself completely. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts fear and liberation. The idea of leaving had always been an impossible one, weighed down by doubt and guilt. Where would she go? What if she was wrong? What if she was overreacting, like Ethan always said she was? But tonight, the excuses felt hollow. Tonight the air felt different. Isabella stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. She turned toward the bedroom, where Ethan lay asleep, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. The sight of him, the man who had once been her entire world, now felt foreign, almost unrecognizable. The love she had clung to for so long had faded, leaving behind only the ghosts of what once was. She moved quietly, pulling a duffel bag from the closet. The action felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. She didn't allow herself to think too much. Thinking had always been her downfall. Thinking had always led to justification to staying. Tonight, she acted on instinct, on the small but fierce voice inside her that whispered, "You deserve more." Clothes, toiletries, her passport. She moved methodically, her hands steady now. She hesitated only once, fingers hovering over the small framed photograph on the dresser. It was taken during their first year together, both of them smiling, caught in a moment of happiness that now felt like a cruel illusion. With a quiet exhale, she left it behind. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the night, the cold air biting against her skin. The city stretched before her, vast and unknowable. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The next morning, Isabella moved through the apartment like a ghost. Ethan had already left for work, leaving behind the usual mess, Dirty dishes crusted with last night's dinner. A half-empty beer bottle tipped over on the coffee table. Clothes strewn carelessly across the living room. The remnants of their latest fight clung to the air like smoke after a fire, suffocating, inescapable. She bent down, her fingers tracing the jagged edges of a shattered glass near the kitchen counter. A deep crack ran along one of the tiles where it had hit the floor. Her chest tightened. The glass wasn't the only thing broken in this apartment. Something inside her snapped. She straightened, inhaling sharply. This wasn't just another morning after. Another day of sweeping the pieces under the rug and pretending the damage wasn't there. She couldn't do this anymore. The weight of years spent tiptoeing around Ethan's moods, cushioning his anger, sacrificing her own needs for the sake of a fragile piece. It was crushing her. She was drowning in it, and if she didn't get out now, she never would. Her hands shook as she moved to the bedroom, pulling out the old suitcase from the back of the closet. It was dusty, neglected. When was the last time she had used it? She unzipped it, the sound slicing through the heavy silence. One by one, she pulled clothes from drawers, folding them neatly, as if giving each fabric a proper farewell. With every item she placed inside, the burden on her chest lightened inch by inch. She was reclaiming herself, one small action at a time. Her gaze flickered to the framed photograph on the nightstand. It was from their first trip together. A weekend getaway to the mountains. They looked happy, arms wrapped around each other, laughing into the camera. She picked it up, staring at the image as a lump formed in her throat. When had they stopped being those people? When had love turned into something sharp-edged and heavy? Something that made her feel small. She turned the frame face down and continued packing. Minutes passed, then an hour. The suitcase was nearly full. She grabbed her jewelry box, slipping her mother's delicate silver necklace around her neck. The cold metal rested against her collarbone, grounding her. A reminder of where she came from, of who she had been before Ethan's shadow loomed over her. Then the final act, her note. She found a pen, her fingers tightening around it as she hesitated over a blank sheet of paper. What could she say? How could she sum up years of hurt and quiet suffering in just a few words? She didn't owe him an explanation. He wouldn't listen even if she tried. So she wrote simple and final. I am leaving. Do not look for me. Her name didn't belong there. He didn't need to know where she was going. He had already taken too much from her. He wouldn't get to take this too. She placed the note on the kitchen table, beside his empty coffee mug. A final piece of herself left behind, but only for closure. Not for him. Then she grabbed the suitcase, her purse, and her coat. She hesitated for only a second at the door, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. The doorknob was cool in her grasp, a threshold between the life she knew and the one she was about to claim. She stepped outside. The crisp morning air hit her face, sharp and bracing. She inhaled deeply, the clean scent of rain-soaked pavement filling her lungs. For the first time in years she felt something close to hope. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Ethan would come home eventually. He would see the note. Maybe he'd be angry, maybe he'd call, demand answers. But she wouldn't be there to give them. That part of her life was over. She walked down the street, her fingers tightening around the suitcase handle. The city moved around her, indifferent to her quiet revolution. People hurried past on their way to work. Taxis honked, shopkeepers flipped signs to open. The world hadn't stopped turning, not even for the collapse of a love that had once seemed unshakable. She reached the bus station, her breath coming faster now, a mix of nerves and exhilaration building in her chest. A ticket. She needed a ticket. Anywhere but here. The thought sent a shiver of excitement through her. The woman at the counter barely looked up as she slid her card across the counter. Where to? The attendant asked, bored, tapping at the keyboard. Isabella hesitated. Where was she going? What did she want? It had been so long since she had been allowed to ask herself that. Next bus out of town, she said finally, her voice steady. The attendant nodded, printed the ticket, and slid it over. Isabella took it, glancing down at the destination. A small town 2 hours away. She had never been there, knew nothing about it. But that didn't matter. It was away. She clutched the ticket tightly as she stepped onto the platform, the first rays of sunlight warming her skin. For the first time in a long time, she was free. Chapter 3. The journey to herself. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella found herself in a small coastal town, far away from the city where she had lost herself. She rented a modest cottage near the sea, a quaint place with whitewashed walls and a blue door that reminded her of the sky on a clear day. Every morning, she stepped outside to the salty breeze, letting the rhythm of the waves lull her into a quiet peace she hadn't known in years. At first, the silence was deafening. She had been so used to Ethan's voice dictating her every move that the absence of his presence felt strange, almost unnatural. Her mind, conditioned by years of his control, expected to be interrupted, corrected, or criticized. But soon she learned to enjoy the quiet. It was in the quiet that she could hear herself again. She filled her days with small intentional joys. She read books she had long abandoned, their pages still carrying the faint scent of forgotten memories. She painted for the first time in years, her brushstrokes hesitant at first but growing bolder with each passing day. She let herself create without fear of judgment, and in doing so she rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried beneath years of compromise. The town itself was like something out of a dream, nestled between rolling hills and the endless sea. It was a place where time seemed to slow down. The locals, warm and welcoming, took her in without question. There was Margaret, the elderly woman who ran the bakery on the corner, always slipping an extra pastry into Isabella's bag. There was Luca, the fisherman who told her stories about the sea, his voice carrying the wisdom of tides that had come and gone for generations. And then there was Elise, a woman around Isabella's age, who owned the small bookstore in town. Elise was the first real friend Isabella had made in a long time. Their conversation started casually, simple exchanges about books and the town's history. But soon Isabella found herself confiding in her, something she had not done with anyone in years. One evening, as they sat on Elise's porch drinking tea, Isabella found herself admitting, "I don't even know who I am anymore." Elise smiled softly. "Then this is the perfect place to find out." And so, Isabella allowed herself to explore, not just the town but herself. She learned how to bake bread for Margaret, feeling a sense of accomplishment as she kneaded the dough with her own hands. She went out on the sea with Luca, learning the art of patience as she waited for the fish to bite. She spent countless afternoons in Elise's bookstore, losing herself in stories that mirrored her own journey of self-discovery. But healing wasn't a straight path. There were nights when the memories of Ethan resurfaced, uninvited ghosts haunting her in the darkness. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her breath ragged, her heart racing. The fear that had once been her constant companion tried to creep back in, whispering doubts and reminders of the past. But she fought back. Each morning she chose to keep going. Each day she chose herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood by the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks. She closed her eyes and let the wind tangle in her hair, breathing in the scent of salt and freedom. For the first time in a long time she felt whole. She wasn't just existing, she was living. As she walked back to her cottage, she thought about the life she had left behind. She thought about Ethan and the way he had convinced her she was nothing without him. And then she thought about the woman she was becoming, the woman who had faced the unknown, who had chosen herself despite the fear, who was learning to love the person she was without apology. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered to herself, "I am enough." And for the first time she truly believed it. Chapter 4. The Freedom Within. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabella sat on the sand, feeling the cool breeze against her skin. The sky was painted in hues of orange, pink, and deepening purple, mirroring the transformation she felt within. She had spent so long believing she was powerless, trapped in the expectations of others, but now she understood the truth. She had always had the strength to leave. She had just needed to believe it. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythmic lapping of the waves, letting the sound anchor her in the present moment. Each breath she took felt lighter, freer, as if she had finally shed the invisible chains that had bound her for years. The ocean had always called to her, a silent witness to her deepest struggles, and now it cradled her in its vastness, whispering promises of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed beside her, pulling her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, already knowing who it was. A message from Ethan. "Come back. We can fix this." The words glowed on the screen, a stark contrast to the peace she felt in her heart. For years she would have jumped at the chance, clinging to the hope that things could be repaired. But not anymore. She had spent too many nights crying, too many days doubting her worth. She had begged for change, pleaded for understanding, and waited for the love she deserved. But love shouldn't be something to chase. It should be something given freely. She stared at the message for a long moment before pressing delete. No anger, no sadness, just peace. A quiet, powerful peace that she had never known before. As the waves whispered against the shore, Isabella smiled, finally free. She stood up, brushing off the sand from her dress, and took a deep breath. The scent of salt and possibility filled her lungs. She had nowhere to go but forward. A gentle laugh escaped her lips as she thought about how afraid she had been to leave, how she had convinced herself that her life was entwined with Ethan's. But the truth was, she had always belonged to herself. She had just needed to reclaim that ownership. Walking along the shoreline, she let the water kiss her feet, cooling the warmth of the setting sun. The town behind her held memories, both beautiful and painful, but she was ready to move beyond them. The horizon stretched infinitely before her, an open canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences, new adventures, new love. For the first time in years she felt untethered, unburdened, no longer confined by the weight of past mistakes, the suffocating guilt, or the illusions of what could have been. The night deepened, stars beginning to dot the sky. Isabella found a small cafe nearby, its warm glow inviting. She stepped inside, ordering a cup of tea, savoring the simple pleasure of solitude. As she sipped, she noticed a group of musicians setting up in the corner. The soft hum of a guitar, the murmur of voices. It was the soundtrack of possibility. She had once dreamed of learning to play the guitar, but life had always pulled her in different directions. Now there was nothing stopping her. Maybe she'd buy one tomorrow, maybe she'd take lessons. The thought made her heart race with excitement. A man sitting at the next table smiled at her. "First time here?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just passing through." "Well, welcome. This place has a way of making people feel at home." She returned his smile, feeling the truth in his words. Maybe she wasn't just passing through. Maybe she was arriving, finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. The music began, and Isabella closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. Every note felt like a new beginning, every lyric a reminder that she was no longer lost. She was free, and this was just the beginning.